Howdy folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio. Now back in the corner here by the little outlaw burg of Hanging Rock, which is, one of my favorite scenes on the layout, but recently I decided to make a small change to the scene. Sometimes I'll do that. I'll come back weeks, months, or in this case years later and take another look at a scene and think, maybe this thing might be better someplace else, or maybe a different detail might look better here. So that's what I'm going to be working on today in this video, changing things up over here and moving some stuff over there. Several years ago, I built this little mining head frame and stuck it up here above Hanging Rock, just because I thought it would look nice and be a nice background addition to the scene. Here it ties in with the Hellengon mine down here below. But the truth is, it's a little bit big. It's full size for O scale, and what I really need up here is something that's more forced perspective to blend in better with the perspective of the backdrop as it recedes off into the distance. And I kind of figured this out the other day when I was cleaning up here, and I picked the whole piece up to move it, and I set it down over in the town of Calico just because there was a blank spot there, and I found out that, I really like the way it looked better over there. Plopping the head frame down right here in the middle of Calico immediately brought to mind the real town of Calico out in San Bernardino, where there are head frames and mine shafts that are just right there in the middle of town. It also reminded me a lot of Virginia City, which was built up around the mines like this too. So now this background model will move to the foreground and become a centerpiece for the Boomtown of Calico. So my plan now is to blend this in to the rest of the scene with some rock work and landscaping, and it's going to be called the Maggie mine, which is named after a mine that you can actually visit and tour in the town of Calico, in the old ghost town. It's configured differently than this one, but the idea of a mine that's right there in town is the same. And as for the spot where the mine used to be above Hanging Rock, I'm going to go back to my original plan, which was to have some forced perspective Indian pueblos up there on the top of the mesa. They'll actually do a really nice job of hiding the electronics for the periodic thunderstorm that happens on the backdrop, which up until now has just been kind of shoved down below the rockwork. But that little project is going to have to wait for another day. Right now, I really want to get that mine head frame worked into the scene at Calico. But before we get too deep into this, let's take a quick look back to 2019 to when I built this mine head frame in the first place. It all started with this plan for a small two-post head frame from the Engineering and Mining Journal of March 1903. I built the head frame to the planned specs out of O-scale lumber, then added a small hoisting shack built mostly from Crescent 300 illustration board. Corrugated roofing from Wild West scale models, some Grant nut bolt washer castings, and a few other details rounded out the model. Then I mounted everything on a 1/8 inch thick MDF base and added some real dirt and rocks to finish things off. I want the Maggie mine to have lighting in it, just like the rest of the structures in Calico. Nice little flickering lantern effect, I think. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is drill down through these layers of foam and through the plywood sub-road bed so I can run wiring up for some LED lighting. I've already drawn an outline here in pencil where the mine sits, and I've marked where I need to drill the hole. Fortunately, I planned ahead when I built the head frame and put a hole there for lighting in the future inside of the hoist shack. So this is going to require a couple of different tools, and the first of those is a hot knife. That'll be used to go down through the foam layers. As soon as it gets hot enough, there we go. And when it stops, that's when we know we've hit the plywood. Take this in kind of a circular motion so I can expand the size of this hole to about 1/4 inch or so. Maybe a little bigger. Now I'll just use my drill with a 1/4 inch bit to do the rest of the work. That'll do it. This is a 3mm yellow flickering LED, and I've potted it down in this piece of plastic tubing from my scrap box so it'll sit at the right height inside the hole there. And I think this is really all the light I want to have coming from inside of the hoist house. Just a warm glow. I don't want anything too overpowering. Just something kind of subtle. Now I'm just going to feed the wires down through the hole we drilled a minute ago. That should sit at the right height, right? Yeah, just like that. And down here under Calico, I've got my little 9-volt DC wiring bus for all of the lighting and etc. Just twist these together and then I can piggyback off the same terminal. Alright. Just flip this on. Make sure it works. Yep. Alright. And now I want to blend the MDF base of the mine into the layout scenery. And the best way to start on that, I think, is with some Sculptamold. There are a few basic tools I need to work with the Sculptamold. One is a small paintbrush like this, soft brush, some water to dip it in. I've got a couple of sculpting knives. One is a good old butter knife and another one is a palette knife. You can use popsicle sticks too. I've used those. And then, of course, we have the Sculptamold itself, and I've just mixed this up. And this is the texture I like it. Nice and firm. This is almost like bread dough. Just you don't want it runny at all. At least I don't. And take just a little pinch. I'm going to start up here in the front. It's got kind of an overhang where hangs off the edge of the foam. And I want to fill that gap in first. And yes, this means that the mine is going to be permanently affixed to this section of the layout. Not worry too much about that. A lot of times, if I have to move something like this, it's easier to just move the whole thing with the structure attached. So I'm just going to fill in under there, work my way around. Sculptamold gives you a pretty long working time. At least like an hour, even when it's a thick mixture like this. So I'll come back and do a lot of refining on that. But the first thing is I just want to blend in the edge of this MDF and blend it down into the foam with the scenery underneath. I'm trying not to get Sculptamold on my wood retaining wall as much as possible because it'll stain it white. I mean, I can clean that up later, but I'd rather not have to. This is the trickiest part right here. Just kind of work that down in there. Use the paintbrush, a little water to feather it up. Like so many things in the model making hobbies, Sculptamold would always rather stick to your fingers than to anything else you're working with. That's why a little bit of water helps. I really like Sculptamold for stuff like this. Where I'm filling in gaps and blending different materials together because it has a body to it. It's not like plaster, which just kind of lays there. Sculptamold is a hybrid of plaster and paper mache, basically. So that cellulose gives it a body that allows you to work it into nooks and crannies and voids and places and fill those in a very effective manner. And when it dries, it dries as hard as concrete. Trying to take out old Sculptamold is no picnic. It's interesting they call it Sculptamold. I have never tried to mold with it. If anybody out there has tried to use it in molds, I'd love to hear what their results were like. And the goal, of course, is when this is done, is for it to look like it's always been there and wasn't actually an afterthought at all. I had some Sculptamold left over, so decided to use it to make a couple of little waste piles down here. And these will all be covered with real rock and debris. Right now they look kind of like little balls of dough, but that's just to give the form. And we'll let all this dry for a little while, and then we'll come back and we'll get some paint on it. I let the Sculptamold dry overnight, and now I am just painting it with the light tan scenic base color that I use for everything here in Calico. And this is just flat latex house paint that I had mixed up down at my local hardware store. Got a whole gallon of it. I highly recommend doing that, having the main colors that you're going to use mixed up in large quantities ahead of time. And that way, when you come back to a project like this after several months, you'll still be able to match all the colors easily, without really having to think about it or worry about it too much. After letting the scenic base coat dry, I'm going to go over all of it again with a dark wash. And this is some black and burnt umber mixed together with a lot of water. So as you can see, it just soaks back in to any of all of the relief and all the detail. Now I'll go away and let that dry for a while. Now I want to go over everything with some lighter tones, just blending this together with the existing scenery. These are the same basic earth tones that I used when painting the scenery in Calico to begin with. Some raw umber, some burnt umber. Why can't anybody ever cook umber right? And some unbleached titanium, which is a very light tan, almost white. Use that just for the highlights. And I'm just going around and just hitting the tops, almost dry brushing. The real Maggie mine in Calico Ghost Town has an adobe exterior, has adobe walls. And even though mine is made of wood, I wanted to kind of pay tribute to that adobe construction and show the layers of history here. Because even though it's a boomtown, maybe the Spanish mined here before. That was often the case in a lot of these mining towns, especially in the Southwest. They were originally discovered by the Spanish and then rediscovered later on. Old prospectors would actually go out looking for old Spanish diggings and claim it as their own, and then they used more modern mining techniques to get to those ore pockets down inside. So I want to, indicate a little bit of that history by having the ruins of an adobe wall on one side of the mine. And one of the best ways to model adobe is with this stuff. This is some polyurethane carving foam. It's available from Blick Art Materials and Amazon.com. I will put a link down below. Great stuff for doing any kind of stonework, or in this case adobe bricks. Just cutting through it with my razor saw. Cuts pretty easily with any kind of woodworking tools. Trying to make a little L shape here, so like there's the remnants of the corner of the wall that'll still standing. Making the walls about a scale 18 inches thick. As I've mentioned before, hot wire cutters that you use for other foams don't really work with urethane foam. You want to use, woodworking tools. round off the corners, the top edge. I just want to put some horizontal lines in to help me to carve my adobe bricks. Usually they were about 10 by 14 inches. We're going to cheat a little bit, make ours a little bigger. I mean, it varied a lot depending on when they were made and who made them. And, you know, they're made in wooden molds filled with mud, so there's a lot of variation there. You don't want it to look too precise. Make sure to bring them around the corner. Now I just want to go over all those lines I just made in pencil, deepen them a little bit. I've got a track nail and my pen vise, which is good for this kind of thing. Now I've got all my adobe bricks carved in, but I don't want them to be all in the same relief. And I want some to be set back like that a little bit, give it some variety. So I'm using a chisel blade and my X-Acto knife to carve some of those back a little bit. Adobe walls, because they're made of mud, just tend to melt away over time. It's mud and straw, so they just kind of, if the plaster outer layer is not kept up, they just erode away into nothing over time. They melt. We've got our adobe wall, but now I want to make it look like ruins. So start by removing some of the bricks up here along the top. And I just go over it with my finger and just kind of round the edges off a little bit, or maybe just carve it back, because this is that melting I was just talking about. That, a little sanding. All these ones along the top should be very rounded from the weather. Yeah, I think that'll work. Then I can paint the whole thing that light tan scenic base color too. I've also saved a couple of the bricks that I've cut off. Use them around the scene, part of the ruins. And if you haven't figured it out by now, obviously what I'm doing is using the exact same colors and techniques to paint this adobe wall as I am on the scenery over there, so it looks like it's all of one piece and all made out of the same local materials. And again, just like I did over in the scene, I want to hit this with the lighter tones. Just kind of dry brushing over the top. On the last pass, just hit it with a little bit of that unbleached titanium. Highlights. Now I'll use some Eileen's tacky glue to cement this into place. I want to go right about here. Now I want to cover most of this with real dirt and rocks to further blend it all in, using the same mixture that I used on the original base of the mine. My first pass is going to be with the more finely sifted mixture. Where this meets the road down here, I've got a lighter tan dirt that I like to use. This is kind of the Calico color. Now for those bigger rocks, especially around the retaining walls. Don't want too much of this wandering off into the road, so use my brush to bring it back. For these waste piles, I'm painting on some diluted white glue so that when I pour the dirt on top it will stick like that. And on top of that, I've got some dirt that I collected up in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado. Some of the real Colorado mines. I don't have very much of it left, so I'm going to have to make another trip up there. Again, I'll groom this a little bit. My paintbrush. I'm going to hit all of this now with my diluted white glue. This is white glue diluted 3:1 with water. Hold everything in place. Can't forget to put our extra bricks in. Now that I've let all that glue dry overnight, we come to my favorite part of this process, which is super detailing the whole scene. First thing is I want to add some grass and weeds, clumps of foliage. This is buffalo grass from Scenic Express. Just putting in place with a little bit of white glue, likely spots, and maybe some wildflowers too, right about there. It's always springtime in Thunder Mesa and Calico. These little foliage clumps make excellent low ground cover or small bushes. You really wouldn't see any cacti or yuccas or anything like that growing around a structure like this, at least not when it was still active, because they would have all been pulled out. But you would see a lot of weeds growing from, just about every time it rains. You get weeds pop up in the desert. So that's kind of what I'm trying to represent here. I really like these kind of bluish green bushes. This is a super turf from Scenic Express. Does a good job of representing a lot of the bushes we have out here in the high desert. Looks a little bit like shrub oak, which grows everywhere on the hillsides around here. Made a sign that I want to put right up here on the crest of the roof. And I did this in Adobe Photoshop like I usually do my signs for different places on the layout. Use some CG wood textures behind it so it looks like it's made out of wood. Printed it out at photo settings on some nice high quality presentation paper, and frame it in, and it's ready to go. Now I've got a couple of characters that I want to add to the scene. These are some Woodland Scenics figures that I painted up to look more like miners. So this guy, he's kind of lazy, leaning up against the building there. We'll call him Luigi. And this is his brother, working hard over here with the ore bucket. We'll call him Mario. Now, presumably there's a steam-powered hoist inside this shack, so you got to have some firewood. I broke up some juniper twigs, glued them in with some white glue over here. Over by the adobe wall seemed like an appropriate place to store the firewood. Hard to have too many shovels and picks around a mine like this. These are some white metal castings from Wiseman Model Services. And with that, I think I'm done with the Maggie mine, at least for now. And that's going to do it for this little project. Thank you so much for watching today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and hit that notification bell if you want to see more. You can also follow Thunder Mesa over on Instagram at thunder.mesa and see all that's new on the Thunder Mesa Studio website at thundermesa.studio. And if you really like what we're doing here on the channel and would like to show your support, you can do what these nice folks did and head on over to patreon.com/thundermesa and show your support there. Until next time, keep moving forward, my friends. Adios for now.